What if I told you the moon you have been staring at your whole life has been lying to you? Deep inside it, something warm is still moving, something that, according to every science book ever printed, should have died 1 billion years ago, and nobody, not one single researcher, saw it coming. The numbers were so strange that the team who found it thought their equipment was broken. Before we go any deeper into this, do me one small favor. Hit that like button, smash subscribe, and share this video with someone who still thinks the moon is just a boring gray rock. Because by the end of this, they will never look at the night sky the same way again. So let us slow down for a second and really think about what this means. For your entire life, textbooks have described the moon in the same tired way. A cold, dead, dusty ball, a silent piece of rock hanging in the sky, zero atmosphere, zero weather, zero surprises, just something that pulls on our oceans and quietly circles our planet forever. That old story is now being torn apart, page by page, by brand new data from NASA. And what is replacing it is stranger, wilder, and honestly a little unsettling. The scientists uncovering this were not squinting at grainy Apollo photos from the 1970s. They were using instruments so advanced that the resolution alone would have seemed like magic to the engineers who built the first lunar landers. And the things those instruments are picking up right now are quietly rewriting the entire plan for how humans return to the moon and stay there. Let us start with the simplest clue of all: temperature. Because temperature is the thread that pulls the entire mystery apart. Stand on the moon during daytime and the ground around you would sit near 120 degrees Celsius. That is hot enough to cook an egg on a rock. Now wait for the sun to slip below the horizon. Within a few hours, that same patch of ground crashes down to around minus 130 degrees. That is a temperature swing of 250 degrees, over and over, month after month, for billions of years. Now imagine what that does to solid stone. It stresses, it cracks, it splits along invisible weak lines. Whole sections eventually shift, some slide, some collapse. This is not a guess. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance orbiter, quietly circling the moon since 2009, has spotted thousands of tiny cliff faces called lobate scarps stretched across the surface like scars. And here is the part that made scientists sit up a little straighter in their chairs. Many of these scars look shockingly young. On a world that is 4.5 billion years old, anything that formed in the last 50 million years is basically new. A huge number of these scarps fall right into that new category. That means the moon's crust is not just carrying old wounds, it is actively cracking. Right now, while you're watching this video. And we have proof. Real, direct, physical proof. Back in the Apollo missions, astronauts left behind seismometers, little machines designed to feel the ground shake. What those machines recorded shocked the researchers monitoring them. Real moonquakes, some hitting magnitude 5, strong enough to shake loose rocks, trigger tiny landslides, and shift debris on unstable slopes. Recently, scientists dusted off that old Apollo data and ran it through modern computers. And what they found was that some of the fault lines that caused those quakes had been active surprisingly recently in geological time. A world that looks completely still from Earth turns out to be quietly trembling. You can actually see the aftermath in orbital photos. Certain slopes are covered in sharp, fresh-looking rubble that clearly slid downhill not long ago. It stands out against the older, faded ground around it like a wound that has not yet had time to heal. At first glance, it can genuinely look like a piece of the moon just broke off and slid away. What you're really seeing is a thick blanket of loose dust called regolith slipping down the slope. It gets shaken loose by moonquakes, by wild temperature swings, and by the endless bombardment of tiny space particles that hammer the moon at full speed because there is no atmosphere to slow them down. Over billions of years, that constant hammering has made the top layer of the moon fragile, powdery, and ready to move at the slightest nudge. And this is not just interesting trivia. This matters, because NASA is now sending humans back. The Artemis program is not a plan. It is happening. And figuring out which patches of ground are actually safe to stand on, and which ones only look safe while hiding cracks underneath, is a life or death question for the next astronauts to plant their boots on that dust. But hold on, because what is happening below the surface is somehow even more shocking than what is happening on top of it. In 2024, a research team studied gravity data from 2 NASA missions called GRAIL and the Lunar Reconnaissance orbiter. And they stumbled onto something no model had predicted. GRAIL was clever. It sent 2 small spacecraft flying in tight formation around the moon back in 2012. Every time they passed over an area with slightly different gravity, one would drift almost invisibly closer to the other, or a hair further away. By measuring those tiny distances with insane precision, scientists built the sharpest map of the moon's gravity ever made. And that map became a kind of X-ray vision. It let them peek deep inside a place no camera could ever go. Their models refused to match reality until they added something new, a soft, partially melted layer sitting between the solid, rocky middle of the moon and the metallic core at its center. Without that hidden layer, the math simply fell apart. The gravity readings were screaming that it had to exist. Their research, published in the journal AGU Advances, suggests that layer is packed with a mineral called ilmenite. Ilmenite is rich in titanium and iron oxide, and it seems to be doing something incredible. It seems to be trapping heat. Now, here's where this gets exciting for anyone dreaming about a future on the moon. Titanium is one of the most valuable metals in modern engineering. Aircraft use it, spacecraft use it, doctors use it inside the human body. It is light, strong, and it resists heat and rust like nothing else. If the moon is really sitting on top of a titanium-rich molten layer, that is not just a scientific curiosity. That is a treasure chest, waiting for whoever gets there first. Because pulling raw material out of the moon would cost a tiny fraction of what it costs to launch the same material off Earth. Fighting Earth's gravity is by far the most expensive part of space travel. Cut that out and suddenly building on the moon becomes realistic. But this discovery came with a mystery attached. A big one. How is that layer still even a little bit liquid? The moon is 4.5 billion years old. It should have lost almost all of its inner heat by now. Its core is small compared to Earth's, which means it never had much heat to begin with. And yet, something down there is still keeping part of it soft. Something is still glowing faintly, deep inside a world that should have gone stone cold long ago. Scientists suspect the titanium and iron oxides in that ilmenite layer are unusually good at holding heat. But how it stayed warm for this long is still an open question, and follow-up studies are racing to answer it right now. Keep this question in the back of your mind, because it is going to connect to something amazing waiting at the moon's poles a little later. Now let me talk about something that sounds like pure science fiction, but is very, very real. For over 50 years, scientists have quietly suspected the moon might be hollow in places. Not empty like a beach ball, but riddled with long underground tunnels. Ancient tubes carved by rivers of lava back when the moon was still volcanically alive. The idea came from Earth. In places like Hawaii and Iceland, lava flows across the land and its outer surface cools first, while the hot inside keeps flowing. When the lava finally drains away, what is left behind is a hollow tube in the rock. Here on Earth, those tubes are a few meters wide. On the moon, where gravity is only 1/6 of ours and ancient eruptions were massive, the same process produced tubes on a monster scale. If you made it this far and your mind is already spinning, tap that like button right now, because it genuinely helps push this video to more curious people like you, and drop a quick comment saying just the word moon, so I know you're still with me on this ride. In 2024, a team of Italian researchers from the University of Trento confirmed something jaw-dropping. Using radar beams that bounced back from deep beneath the surface, they detected a real cave under the Mare Tranquillitatis. That is the exact same area where Apollo 11 landed in 1969, the same patch of ground where Neil Armstrong took humanity's first step onto another world. Underneath it, they found a cave at least 100 meters deep, and possibly hundreds of meters wide. And this is likely just one of many. There could be entire hidden networks stretching across the moon, all leftovers from that ancient volcanic age. This is not just cool, it changes everything about how humans will live on the moon. A cave gives astronauts something the surface never can: free protection. The lunar surface is bombed by solar radiation, cosmic rays, and tiny space rocks that arrive at bullet speed. Any surface base would need heavy, expensive shielding just to keep the people inside from cooking. But a cave? A cave is already shielded. Solid rock overhead does the job for free. And here is another quiet miracle. NASA measured that just below the moon's surface, the temperature holds steady at around 17 degrees Celsius, regardless of the wild extremes above. Think about that. Up top, the temperature swings by 250 degrees. Down below, it is basically room temperature. Engineers are now seriously discussing whether humanity's very first permanent moon base should be built inside one of these lava tubes, rather than exposed on the surface. But even the safest cave in the universe is useless without one thing: water. And that is where this story turns toward the poles of the moon. And what is waiting there might be the most valuable discovery in the entire history of space exploration. The moon barely tilts on its axis, only about 1 degree. Earth tilts around 23 degrees, which is why we get the seasons. On the moon, that near zero tilt means the sun never climbs high near the poles. The rays skim in sideways, almost parallel to the ground, and inside the deepest polar craters, sunlight has never touched the floor, not once, not ever. Shackleton Crater sits at the moon's south pole. It stretches over 20 kilometers wide and drops more than 4 kilometers deep. Its floor has been in total darkness for billions of years. The temperature down there sits around minus 200 degrees Celsius, colder than almost anywhere in the known solar system. And in cold that deep, any water that ever drifted in has nowhere to go. It stays. It freezes. It waits. Back in 2009, NASA did something bold. They deliberately crashed a spent rocket stage into one of these shadow craters and sent another spacecraft flying through the debris cloud that shot up. They wanted to see what got kicked out. What they found was undeniable: water ice, actual frozen water buried in the lunar dirt. But that was only the beginning. Earlier this year, in April of 2026, NASA confirmed something even bigger. Using newer orbital data and refined models built together with international partners, the picture became sharper than ever. Water ice has been slowly building up inside these dark polar craters for at least 1.5 billion years. Layer after quiet layer, undisturbed since long before complex life ever appeared on Earth. Current estimates suggest hundreds of millions of tons of water might be sitting frozen in those craters. Some models push it into the billions of kilograms. Let that number sink in for a moment. Not a drop of it is sitting in a lake. It is all locked inside the lunar soil as microscopic ice crystals. To get it out, astronauts will need to drill into that soil, warm it up gently, and capture the water vapor before it escapes into the vacuum of space. Difficult? Absolutely. But the reward is beyond anything humanity has ever pulled off. Because water is not just for drinking. Water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen using solar power, and hydrogen and oxygen are rocket fuel. Do you see where this is going? A base at the lunar South Pole could make its own fuel right there on the surface. The moon could become humanity's first cosmic gas station, a refueling stop for missions heading deeper into the solar system. And because launching from the moon takes only a fraction of the energy needed to leave Earth, that gas station changes the math of space travel forever. Now here's a detail almost every news story misses. NASA has spotted specific ridges near the South Pole where sunlight almost never stops. They call them peaks of eternal light. Because of the moon's tiny tilt, these ridges are lit almost 24/7. And they sit close enough to the shadowed ice craters that power cables between them are actually possible. Now picture this: a solar farm sitting on a bright, sunlit ridge, an ice mining operation working in permanent darkness just meters away, and a crew habitat tucked safely inside a lava tube nearby, shielded by solid rock, all connected, all working as one system. That is not a movie plot. That is the actual working blueprint that NASA, ESA, and other agencies are quietly building toward. Artemis Sec is already underway. It sent astronauts sweeping around the far side of the moon, the first humans in over 50 years to lay their own eyes on that hidden hemisphere. They also set a new distance record for human space travel. Artemis 3 is being aimed at no earlier than mid-2027. Its mission is to put astronauts down inside one of 13 candidate landing zones, all clustered within 6 degrees of the South Pole. Each zone was carefully picked to balance enough sunlight for solar power with close reach to those precious frozen ice deposits. And China is not sitting still. Its Chang'e 7 lander is also headed for the lunar South Pole this year, chasing the exact same ice. When multiple countries and private companies all rush toward the same small area of another world in the same handful of years, that tells you something. That ice is not just water, it is power, it is fuel, it is the future. Now do you remember that mysterious hole on Mars I hinted at earlier? Here is where it all connects. And honestly, this part might be the most haunting piece of the entire story. Back in 2017, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance orbiter photographed a stretch of Martian ground dotted with strange holes. Most were shallow pits, with dark soil peeking out from under a coat of frozen carbon dioxide. But one of them stood apart. It was almost perfectly circular, around 100 meters wide, ringed by a sharp crater lip. And unlike every other hole nearby, this one appeared to drop straight down, into somewhere, into something, into a space of unknown depth. Researchers believe a meteorite slammed clean through a thin section of Martian surface. By pure accident, it punched a doorway into a hidden underground cave. A cave that was already there long before the impact happened, carved out by ancient volcanic activity back when Mars still had a beating geological heart. Why does a random hole on another planet matter so much? Because caves are exactly where scientists now believe alien life is most likely to be hiding. If you are still watching, take a deep breath and pause for just 1 second. If your brain is quietly exploding right now, drop this video into any group chat. And go ahead and hit subscribe if you have not already, because the story I am about to tell you is genuinely one of the strangest things NASA has ever caught on camera. Think about it. The surface of Mars today is brutal. There is almost no magnetic field to block radiation. The atmosphere is too thin to shield anything. The ground is bone dry and freezing. If any tiny life ever existed on Mars billions of years ago, when it was warmer and wet, it would have been slowly wiped out on the exposed surface. But underground, everything flips. Rock overhead blocks radiation, temperatures stabilize. Any water still hiding, whether frozen or as salty brine, would be sheltered from the harsh conditions above. It is the same reason lunar caves are attractive to future astronauts. It is also the reason Martian caves are the strongest candidates for finding either surviving microbes or the fossilized traces of life that vanished eons ago. By 2019, NASA had already mapped over 1,000 potential cave entrances across Mars using orbital imagery alone. And the European Space Agency's Mars Express mission has separately confirmed ancient lava tubes hiding beneath extinct Martian volcanoes. The underground network keeps growing every time we look closer. But there is one more Martian mystery worth telling before we close this out, because it will matter for anyone who ever sets foot on that red dust. For more than 50 years, scientists have puzzled over roughly 2 million dark streaks running down slopes. Long, thin lines that look exactly like something wet trickled down and stained the ground behind it. When they were first photographed in the 1970s, the leading theory involved liquid water, melting ice, sliding down slopes, then refreezing or evaporating. That theory hung around for decades, partly because water is the sexiest explanation. And wherever there is liquid water, there's at least a hint of a chance of life. But a recent study crushed that dream. Pulling together data collected between 2006 and 2024 and studying more than 2 million individual streaks, researchers finally solved it. The streaks match the wind, not water. They form when strong Martian winds push loose dust off slopes, exposing darker rock underneath. It looks like a wet trail from orbit, but it is actually a dry dust avalanche. Slowly, over decades, fresh dust settles back down and the streaks fade away. And here is the wild part. Around 80,000 brand new slope streaks form on Mars every single year. Combined with the millions already there, this process may be one of the largest ongoing sources of dust in the entire Martian atmosphere. That dust changes weather. It changes surface temperatures. It changes how much sunlight reaches the ground. It is one of the biggest daily challenges any future human mission will face. Dust storms have already threatened rovers. Dust coating solar panels has already crippled missions. Any colony there will need to fight it constantly. Now put every piece of this together. The moon is not the frozen corpse we thought it was. It is a world with a warm, titanium-rich molten heart nobody predicted. A world where the ground quietly cracks and slides even now. A world with vast underground caves big enough to shelter cities. A world with hidden oceans of ancient ice at its poles, ready to fuel humanity's next great leap. And Mars, our red neighbor, is hiding an entire underground world that may hold the answer to the greatest question ever asked. Are we alone? Its surface is not dead either. Every year, tens of thousands of new dark streaks appear, quietly reshaping the ground. None of this was in your grandfather's textbooks. Most of it was not even known 5 years ago. Every time humanity builds better instruments and points them at these two worlds, they turn out to be more alive and complex. And there is one more piece of this story I have to share with you, because it connects the hidden inside of the moon to something the Apollo astronauts noticed. And when those astronauts returned in the late 1960s and early 1970s, lunar dust had crawled into every crack of their suits and gear. When that dust met the oxygen inside their spacecraft cabin, several of them noticed the exact same eerie smell. Something like burning metal, like gunpowder, like fireworks. Lunar dust has no real chemistry in common with gunpowder, but every single grain of it is sharp and jagged under a microscope, like tiny shards of broken glass. Because there is no wind and no water on the moon, nothing has ever smoothed those grains down the way ocean waves round out sand on Earth. And with no oxygen or moisture around, those particles sit for billions of years in a kind of frozen, ready-to-react state. The moment they finally touch oxygen inside a spacecraft cabin, they wake up. They react instantly. And that is where the strange smell of gunpowder comes from. Engineers designing the next generation of suits and habitats for Artemis are working right now on how to control that same reactive dust. Because Apollo proved it gets everywhere, into seals, into filters, into lungs. It is more than an annoyance. It is one of the biggest hidden dangers of long-term life. So take a moment and let this all sink in. The moon is not dead. Mars is not dead. And the closer we look at either one of them, the truer that becomes. Think about what this means for the next few years alone. Artemis astronauts are getting ready to walk near an ice-packed polar zone that could power a base. Their boots will press down on ground, sitting above a molten titanium layer nobody expected. And just meters below them, there could be lava tubes big enough to shelter residents. Meanwhile, rovers and orbiters at Mars are already circling more than 1,000 cave entrances, quietly picking where we might look for signs of alien life. None of this is guesswork. Every single claim you heard tonight is backed by real missions, real instruments, and real peer-reviewed data collected recently. The gap between what we thought we knew and what we now know has never closed this fast. And it is closing faster every year. If you made it this far, you now understand more about what is really happening inside the moon and beneath Mars than the vast majority of people ever will. And that is exactly why this channel exists. Now here's my last thought for you. When you step outside tonight and look up at the moon, do not see a dead rock. See a world with a warm secret in its belly. See lava tubes wide enough to hide entire cities. See ancient ice sleeping in shadow at its poles, waiting for humans to come and change history. That old view of the moon is gone forever, and what is taking its place is far more beautiful and far more alive than we ever dared to imagine.